Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to this session, Measuring What Matters, Work-Based Learning Data Practices. My name is Dick Jones. I'm with the New York State CTE Technical Assistance Center, working with CTE programs in New York State. I've got a multi-decade experience in education. I started out in career and technical education, spent a lot of time in school improvement, working across the country, and now I feel like I've come full circle that I'm back working with career and tech programs in New York State for the last 10 years. I'm joined in this presentation by my colleague, Susan Leon. She couldn't be with us today for the conference, but she and I have shared a lot of conversations in putting together this presentation. Susan, would you share a little bit about your background?
Yes, thank you. I'm Susan Leon. I work currently for WestMech, which is in the West Valley of the Phoenix area of Arizona. We are the CTED over the West Valley. We serve several school districts, and we have 26 programs and growing, where high school students can come to our central campuses. We have programs ranging all the way from hairstyling to aviation, from precision machining, all the way to medical assisting. My background is I was an instructor for 8 years. I started teaching middle school for 2 years. I taught a career and technical education career exploratory class. Then I moved up to high school and I taught culinary arts, business foundations. But my last 4 years teaching, I taught the work-based learning program in our district. And that's where my love for work-based learning began, and the seed was planted. And now it's just really grown into something that I'm extremely passionate about. And I've met some very great people along the way at conferences when I expressed my love of work-based learning. And I was lucky enough to get connected with Dick at the last Visions conference. And we complement each other well with our knowledge and skill sets of work-based learning. So we wanted to present to you together on Measuring What Matters, Work-Based Learning Data Practices.
I've become convinced over the last couple of years how important work-based learning is for the future directions in all of career and technical education. Coupled with the increasing interest in career and technical education, the rapid changes within jobs and opportunities, and the whole opportunity to learn informally makes it difficult to try and create traditional CTE programs. We can only respond to that need to prepare as many students as we can for good job opportunities that are high paying with a series of work-based learning experiences. And for that, while it's a good opportunity, it puts some pressure on us, those of us working with work-based learning programs, to make sure we're improving those programs and using data as a part of that. And that's the message we want to share today. Everyone that works in work-based learning is proud of their programs, but I'd ask you, how do you really know your program's being successful? Susan, I'd ask you that question.
Again, I taught for 4 years, and my measure of success was my students. And I had personal relationships with all of them, and it was so great to see them grow. I knew their goals. I knew what they were going to do when they graduated. And most recently, a couple months ago, my husband and I ventured out for one of our first outings to a restaurant again. And we went to a local restaurant in Surprise. We walked in, and the girl that greeted us at the door was one of my former interns, Regina. And we connected again, and I got to learn what she was doing at that point. She had done her internship in a wedding cake bakery, and now she was still working at a restaurant, still with her love of culinary, but shared with me that she had now obtained her realtor license and she was going to be selling houses. She was very proud of herself. She remembered exactly what happened during her experience with me in my class, and I remembered her, and it was great to reconnect with her. And when I talk about my successes as a work-based learning teacher, I talk in those terms. So Regina to me is a success.
Absolutely. And it's those, for coordinators, those are great experiences to feel satisfaction that you've really made a difference in a young person's life. It gives us encouragement for the work that we do as educators, but we also have to remember that there's other ways to communicate success, not just telling the stories about individual students. Susan, I know that you've, in the presentations I heard a year ago from you and others that you've done, that you really have focused in on the quality indicators that ACTE has developed, with one section of those being specifically focused on work-based learning. And those are important in understanding what some of the best practices are.
Right. So what Dick is referencing is last year when he attended one of my talks, it was centered around number 11, which is a high quality indicator for work-based learning. And I've done a lot with number 11 and really digging into the components of 11. One of the initiatives we had at WestMech was to make a district specific work-based learning continuum. So we have that on the slide for you that you can see. This aligns with some of the activities that we specifically do in our district. However, your state or your district might also have a continuum. So that's been an initiative of ours. But when you're also looking at number 11, you can kind of group them into 3 different categories. Administrative concerns, you as the teacher, how are you managing goals, paperwork, students? How is the school managing your program? Absolutely the legal and ethical concerns. As we know, students are going off site while still getting a school credit. So how does that look? What type of systems, paperwork, communication do you need to have in place? And then of course, the big one, how are we really facilitating and growing those industry partnerships? So to me, when I wrap my head around work-based learning, it doesn't seem like I'm being myopic, but I am focused on that high quality indicator for 11. But when Dick and I connected to really go deeper into data that affects work-based learning, our next component is we really want to involve the other high quality indicator. Dick, do you want to talk about that one?
Exactly. Those things that you see and feel in describing the practices within indicator 11 are the work that you do as a coordinator. But when you think about improvement, you need to step to number 12, which happens to be right next to that. And that's kind of the main message we want to convey to coordinators today, is to think about connections between 11 and 12, work-based learning and those data indicators. If you look at some of the characteristics that it describes into good data practices is to be clear about your purpose for your data. Why are you collecting that data? How are you collecting that data and doing that in as efficient way as possible? And who is the data for? I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. That's important to understand, and making sure that you meet that person's need in terms of the data that you provide. Whenever using data, keeping it easy to understand is critical. We as educators sometimes bury ourselves in data that doesn't really convey the meaning and understanding. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping that easy. One of the things that has come from federal accountability over the last decade is expecting us to disaggregate the data by various student subpopulations. And that's a very powerful mechanism to make sure we really are improving and not just working with the best and brightest of our students, but those that can benefit most from our expertise, and in this case, from work-based learning opportunities. So it isn't just looking at the total number of students served and how well they've been served, but breaking that down into the subgroups is a very powerful data practice. Using data, it can be a process for ongoing improvement. And so as you think about ratcheting up achievement in those practices and success for your students in work-based learning, guiding the decisions along the way in terms of using data is really important.
So, as you guys could kind of tell, I'm personally not somebody that is extremely comfortable with data, and I always focus when instructing my own work-based learning program on impressing. So if somebody asked me a level of success, how do I measure that in my program? I would have told you the Regina story. However, working with Dick and working and exploring number 11 being influenced by high quality indicator number 12, Dick has really opened my eyes to the theory of impress versus improve, and really improving the work-based learning program that you're working with as a whole. So Dick, could you go into your impress versus improve?
This slide comes out of a slide presentation several years ago that I did and talking about data. There's a time and place for stories, and that sharing of emotions is very powerful in connecting with people. But if we're really talking about improving rather than impressing, rather than just catching the emotional intention, we have to put that into some quantitative terms. And that's important for us to think about as educators. This next slide gives you a little bit of deeper distinction between what we might do in trying to impress people versus really trying to improve our practices.
So some of your data is going to be on results, things like students served, hours completed, but over time, you need to compare those to your current practice to try to improve your practice. So if you changed any of those, could you see a change in results? So that's a fundamental piece of adopting data to improve high quality components in indicator 11. So we're really using some of the components that ACTE has developed for 12 to influence in 11. So those big pieces and putting it all together can use you to guide decisions on your program as a whole going forward.
You could almost think about this as some action research. If you're not familiar with action research techniques, it really applies in this situation, and you might want to do some research on that. There's some great educator resources out there. This is a matter of collecting data to see how your results change over a period of time as you try different practices. If you tried a different recruitment process, or you change the way you did the supervisory visits to the job sites, and you wanted to see, does that make a difference in the measures within your program, you can set up some very simple action research studies to collect some data on that. And you can make better decisions about how you modify those practices over a period of time. One of the big observations that really struck me as we thought about this piece on data is that we don't think about the different audiences that we're trying to prepare for. And along with that, the quality question. As we look at the quality indicators, most of those quality indicators are for us as educators or work-based learning coordinators. What are the practices we need to do to improve the quality of our program? But we can't do that program without the involvement of a lot of other people. And particularly with work-based learning, it involves employers. It involves, many cases, recruiting students to be a part of that particular experience, and maintaining support to continue to offer those programs. And so each of those audiences have a little different need for data. And so one of the resources I'm going to share with you that we'll put the link to that in the chat box is a paper that goes into much more detail about what are the quality questions that each of these groups has in terms of work-based learning, and what is the data that you can best provide so that they can understand the quality of your programs. The most important person is you as coordinator or teacher, because you're going to use that data to measure results and adjust your practices over a period of time. And so you want to make sure you've got the data that meets your needs in making decisions about your programs. And that's the point that Susan was making. That's the primary role that you have in using data to improve your programs over a period of time. Do you have data that helps you make good decisions about your programs? Even doing some things like surveys of feedback from students, from parents and employers as to how well those placements have proceeded can give you some feedback as to whether you need to make some adjustment in your practices.
And I would jump in and say too, as a teacher coordinator, one of the biggest ways that I used data when put together was recruitment. So to really give students, parents, and even district staff a full picture of what was occurring in my class and talk to future potential students and parents that might take work-based learning.
And I think the more that you can give that student background on that placement, they're in a better position to go in and be successful in that, rather than saying, here's an assignment, go there, and the employer will tell you what to do. Setting that up with some information and background for the student is really important in making that successful. Another one is the employer. We don't think about, they have expectations with that for that student, and that student is not a blank slate. Can we provide more information for the employer about what the student's long-term goals are? What are their learning objectives as a part of this experience? Are there some specific talents and skills that that student has that brings to the job? For example, the student might be bilingual, have language skills that might be very beneficial to the employer. So it isn't just a one-way street of providing learning experiences for the students, but being a partnership where they can contribute to that employment situation as well. So having some information about the students can be very valuable to the employer, along with the traditional things of information about what's real being expected to learn in terms of skills on the job. Another key group is the school leaders, that they are the key decision makers providing resources for the program, deciding about staffing levels, other resources that you need, reimbursement for mileage, transportation in some cases. So making sure that school leaders have got information about the program and the success, and not just about the number of students being served, but the nature of those experiences and the skills that have been developed, the different employers that are actively involved, and also one that we'll talk about in terms of data is the economic impact that work-based learning has within the community. That can be a powerful one because school leaders are interested in building those strong community relationships. And so think about ways that you can give them information that's going to make their job easier and relationships with the community stronger. The last one is state leaders have interest in compliance and accountability. And often our data systems kind of get back to a basic, what's the state require us in filling out forms with the number of students and the number of hours that have been completed and perhaps what career area those skills are in. But that's a necessary piece in making sure that policy decisions can be made at the state level. But in addition to providing that data for the state, we want to make sure we have that as part of a robust system that informs all of these groups in the use of data. And not every group needs all of the data. And so that's where it's important to pull out some customized reports to provide the key information or key data to these groups at the important time.
And here in Arizona, at a district and state leadership level, as in many of your states, work-based learning affects scores for our different satellite districts. So in Arizona, we call it CCRI points, the college and career ready indicators. And on the matrix, work-based learning can give a child's home school quite a bit of points on the scale. So we want to make sure we're reporting back to those home schools and state leadership the correct information.
Great. Next thing we wanted to talk about was some data elements. And this is a piece we'll talk a little bit about. We'll give you a resource as well with a lot more information. Or what are some of the specific categories of data elements that would be useful to collect that could be used for those different audiences? And listed here are just 5 categories of those. I'm going to explain those a little bit. Placement information is the information around that particular work-based learning placement. Who's the employer? Where is it? Are there specific work hours that are a part of that? The demographic information on the student, So all of those things that we typically think about in a training plan that would set up and describe for the student and the employer, what does that placement consist of? The second one and third one or two are student background and personal objectives. Student background is where you can get into talking about some of the prior experiences that the student has. Also, does the student have some specific skill or credential that could be useful with documenting technical skills? We want to list those here. What are the students' personal objectives in terms of this? Having students think about this before they get into it. Oh, I'm going on a work-based learning. Well, what are your goals of what you want to accomplish? How does that tie in with your long-term education and career plans? And having students write those down. And those can be of interest to the employer. The learning expectation is where we get specific about the technical skills that will be developed. And sometimes they're specific, sometimes they're open-ended, but certainly customized to that particular career area. But also thinking about the workplace behaviors that we want to have and the soft skills that are important. And also, do we give students an opportunity to identify some of those? Are there some behaviors that they particularly want to focus on and demonstrate in terms of the experience that would be a part of that? And then finally, the learning results, where those skills would be converted into ratings of what the student has accomplished, and many provide that. And it also would include things like hours, and possibly converting that to an economic value. This is where you might also record some things about the value of individual enterprises, where agriculture students or others might be involved in a personal enterprise in addition to working with an employer as part of their experience. So I want to go into a little bit of detail. I mentioned a couple of these about digging deeper through the data and some innovative practices that I've seen that can have great impact in improving the quality of work-based learning. And the first one is that of economic value. And you think about going to a school superintendent and talking about your program in terms of the hundreds of thousands of dollars of value of work and enterprises in your community. That can be a very powerful number that they can use in conversations with the community and school leaders, that the school isn't just taking things from the community, but it's contributing things to the community. And in terms of economic value, that can be a very positive thing that you can create from your data on work-based learning. The industry alignment is another critical one. We talk about from the Perkins legislation that we want to focus career and technical education on high wage, high opportunity employment. And we want to make sure that our work-based learning is not just taking advantage of where convenient employers that we've used in the past, but are we finding employers that are going to give students good opportunities for a brighter future? Now, that doesn't mean you've got every student in high-tech job opportunities, and some of those are difficult to identify. There can be, depending upon the student, some very specific placement that is really focusing on the work behaviors, and that's the goal of that work-based learning. But in general, collecting data around the alignment with industry and careers is going to be a useful piece of information, particularly when you're going to talk about advocacy in your program. The student strengths we mentioned can be a great one to bring that to the equation. Soft skills enhancement. This is an area that I've been working on the last couple of years, and the session that Susan and I had talked about and reflected on from a couple of years ago. We need to make sure we're doing a good job of documenting the soft skills that students demonstrate from the work in work-based learning. It's one of the most valuable pieces that can document the student learning. And if we can have the student reflecting about those particular things, they recognize that those are things that they can put in their portfolio and have handy in their resume and saying, these are the skills that I have that I bring to the workplace. Susan, you want to talk about serving the right students?
Sure. I think that's we want to make sure overall we're serving the right students, but are we serving students who otherwise wouldn't have this opportunity, I think is the big question. We know that some students that come into our work-based learning programs have a limited scope of knowledge of even a certain career they think they want to go into, or even broader than that. So we really want to dig deep and make sure that the students are getting exposure to a lot of variations of careers, that they're placed in the right business that can help grow them, and they might not necessarily stay in that industry or that specific business, but it's giving them exposure to a lot of varied experiences and people so they can start building their network.
Let me just go to the next steps. You had quizzed me about that. We need to make sure we give some very practical next steps for people leaving this session. And while this has been a brief overview, and we're going to have some handouts for you with additional information, here's a couple of things that come to mind. Quality versus quantity. We measure quality, we think about our good successes in describing those in stories, but how can we convert that into quantifiable measures? They help us with building advocates, they help us improve our program. Next, you want to be reflecting on the information you are providing key people. Think about those different groups. Don't just think about data that you're going to roll up to a federal accountability requirement, but are you providing data for your employers, for your students, and for your school administrators that are going to continue to have effective work-based learning programs? And then next, you want to analyze your current data tools and reports. What do you have now? What's possible? That's not going to be a dramatic change. You're going to have to look at some things that you do incrementally, but get to think about what are the opportunities out there for doing some things different, and doing some shopping about potential providers. This has been helpful for me in some conversations, and I know you've done some work on that this last year. You want to share a little bit of that, Susan?
Thank you. So WestMec as a district is really trying to refine our work-based learning practices right now regarding reporting and just systems in general. So we spent the past year really diving deep into some providers, seeing what they could give us as systems, if they had their own apps, and what they could provide our students and teachers with. What we've kind of fallen on this year is we're going to build our own internal app, so a WestMec app 1.0. And that app's going to do a lot of different things for students and parents and teachers. But in the 1.0 version, our district leadership has narrowed down 2 or 3 different objectives they want the 1.0 version to do, but in that is work-based learning reporting. So we really want to focus on a district moving a lot of the processes right now that are teacher-led to student-led. So through that app, our students can put in their own hours. They can take pictures and make PDFs of any documents that were signed that they need to upload. They can track when they achieve their goals, certain standards, certain professionalism skills. And then we're really working through articulating what is needed through our scaffolded items in that continuum and what we need the app to be able to do for students and teachers and parents. But then also on the back end of that app, how can we pull the reports we need to from all that so we can more seamlessly get the data to report back on different aspects that our district leadership would look at. How many students in each program participated in a work-based learning experience? What skills, both technical and professional, did they achieve? And then that piece of the economic impact, can we quantify that into dollar signs? So when we're marketing our district and our programs to external stakeholders, we have some eye-catching marketing numbers so they can see that WestMec truly is a community partner and we are growing the future workforce for the West Valley of Phoenix.
Here's our contact information. Susan and I would both love to follow up with any conversations. If you've got some ideas to share that we haven't touched on, I think there's going to continue to be a lot of conversations about how we use data effectively in all of CTE, but particularly with work-based learning programs. I'll also put in the chat a list of some resources that we're familiar with and some contact information for you to follow up with. But thank you very much for attending this session. We hope we raised your interest in making connections between data and work-based learning.
Thank you.